Yes, I see you there. Hold your horses. Don't break my concentration. I'm trying to tune in. It's almost there. Oh, I see lights. I see sparklies. Yes, there it is. And... Ha! Got it! The Old School Essentials campaign. The ones that are assaulting Raven's Ruin. Let's see what they've been up to. When we last saw them, the group had fought some goblins, a wolf, and rescued a cleric of Foltis. Now, after a couple of days' rest, they're going back into the compound. As is my fashion, I use the Order of the Stick Monster for Every Season cutout minis to portray events in my review caps. The players. In today's group we have Neil playing Secundus von Zuul, a lawful cleric of Foltis. Marcel playing Legolas, chaotic elf. Nathaniel playing Colin Bush, a lawful cleric of Elona. And George playing Reed, neutral halfling. The group has spent 2 days healing after the last incursion to Raven's Ruin, and have been unable to locate more retainers. Down to 4, as the chaotic Gerhardt is AWOL, and Parkour has church duties to attend to, they discuss going back to the Castellan Keep for reinforcements. Mayor Bauer inquires as to their progress, but upon learning that they plan to leave for 2 days, he recruits 2 members of the militia to aid them rather than lose the time. The team is joined by Morag and Ewan. Reed and team upgrade the militia's armor from leather to chain. Then the hearty adventurers return to the ruin. Exploring, they find it oddly quiet and empty. The ambush room, where they previously lost many party members, contains the corpses of dead men. Not their friends, though. It's another group entirely. Some discussion is had about Bauer hiring other mercenaries, though Morag swears it's not true. But word of the reward for the return of the scepter has spread, so people will be coming of their own accord. A reinforced locked door proves too sturdy to beat down, despite Legolas's bluster about the might of his spindly elven legs. Finding another door open, one that wasn't apparent previously, they creep cautiously to this new portal, rigid with anticipation of what might lie beyond, inching closer and tighter, the tension like a taut rope as they enter the dark room, their torchlight shining upon...
This better be good.
Darkness there, and nothing more.
You know what would have been scarier than nothing? What? Anything!
Nothing but an empty storeroom. A large cabinet and a bundle of rotting foodstuffs is all they find. Colin and Reed are unable to batter open the locked cabinet, but Reed's search of the rotting foodstuffs provokes 2 large rats buried in the mess, catching him by surprise. The battle with the hungry rats proves costly, as Ewan is killed before the group can finish them. Morag wails in grief, aiming her vitriol at the halfling for his reckless behavior. Leaving Ewan for now, they push forward, Legolas very concerned that the ruckus hasn't attracted anything. Delving further, they find a kitchen, swarming with normal-sized rats. They seal the door back up quickly. Another door leading to a beautiful sitting room has the group wary. A corridor leads around it, which they check, finding yet another door. When Reed attempts to enter the sitting room, he finds the floor unstable, and his very slight size allows him to jump back out of the room before a tentacle moves the carpet away, revealing a muddy pit underneath. A hypnotic purring sound attracts him. He finds himself mesmerized, drawn to the mud. But Morag restrains him and shuts the door before he dives into the muck to an unpleasant death. Reed thanks her profusely, but asks why. She replies that while she may be angry with him, she doesn't wish him dead. Meanwhile, in the side passage, from the rubble of a seemingly collapsed hallway, a large horror emerges from the shadows and catches Secundus off guard. A giant black widow spider attacks with surprise, but her bite doesn't penetrate his armor. Legolas casts a magic missile at it as Reed and Secundus attack. The magic missile strikes true. The widow attempts to bite Secundus but misses again. Next round, the Black Widow rolls morale after being reduced by 25% of its hit points. but fails and withdraws back to its hiding spot amongst the rubble. While this is happening, Colin is watching the rear. A wandering monster check is made and 2 kobolds emerge, but morale fails them and they flee. Colin warns the team that he spotted kobolds and suspects an ambush outside the complex. The group ignores his advice and pushes forward. The group finds an empty vault, only thing remaining being a well-crafted wooden chair. The group fears the worst, that their incursions may have prompted the humanoid raiders to pack up and move on. Finding a master bedroom with 2 goblins asleep on the floor and a human in a bed, Reed enters the room only to be hit by a wave of magic that puts him straight to sleep. After some deliberation, Legolas attempts to retrieve him by crawling in, with Morag holding onto his legs to pull him out if need be. The magic puts Legolas to sleep. They drag him out and try again, after waking him up. After a few attempts, he is able to shake off the effects long enough to pull Reed out and wake him up from the magical slumber. Reed suggests that they should rescue the sleeping man, as he's under a curse and doesn't deserve this. They decide to try, and manage to get a hold of him and pull him off the bed before succumbing to the spell. Upon waking, the man's reaction to them is positive. He reveals that his name is Raven, and after learning that he's been asleep for 2 years, aids them in exploring the rest of the facility. Raven is dismayed that his fortune has been stolen by humanoids, but leads him to his untouched study, where he claims some small treasure left behind and pulls some scrolls off the shelves. A clerical scroll that he gives to Secundus, and an arcane scroll that he gives to Legolas, the only reward he is able to offer them. The cleric scroll has cure light wounds and find traps on it, but Legolas can't examine the arcane scroll without the aid of read magic, which he does not possess. The group decides to try to wake up the goblins who are under the sleep magic to pump for information. Returning to the mule outside to gather rope, they find the mule is gone, with traces of the kobolds having been there. Colin feels well vindicated with his I told you so's. Inside, alone with Raven, Legolas spins a story about how the others just wanted to leave him, and that he convinced them to attempt the rescue. Raven smirks and nods politely. Upon the return of the group, Secundus asks if anything is going on, to which Raven replies that Legolas was just amusing him with a mummer's tale. Raven recalls that the last thing he remembers is putting up his artwork, a wood engraving, before sleeping. The group deduces that it was the art that caused it. Reed rushes in, attempting to resist the magic for long enough to remove it from the wall, which works. Interrogating the goblins, Legolas has a fit of rage and puts his dagger to the throat of the goblin to intimidate him, getting the hobgoblin name of Myculubict before deciding to slit his throat. The group reacts. Morag is hostile about murdering a helpless prisoner. Legolas protests that it's a vile creature with no rights here. The other goblin doesn't speak common, but does speak hobgoblin, which Legolas also speaks, and reveals that their leader, the hobgoblin Myculubict, was preparing to return to his tribe with his spoils. The tribe located in the caves near the hated human keep. Legolas keeps this information to himself, and the group ties up the goblin and marches out. Legolas, in back with the goblin, cuts his bindings and cries out that the goblin has escaped and readies his sword to kill him. The group rolls against surprise, but turns in time to act. Initiative is rolled for the group, the goblin, and Legolas each, but Legolas wins. He rolls to strike and connects with 8 damage, killing the goblin instantly. There is heated debate as Legolas insists that the goblin broke free and was going to attack, which the group doubts, until Raven chimes in, corroborating the fabricated story thanks to a positive reaction roll. The others accept this, but wary eyes linger on Legolas. The group retrieves Ewan's body and returns to Kleina. Legolas makes a show of empathy, promising Morag that he'll pay for Ewan's burial. Raven lets them keep the magic engraving, which the group is tempted to sell, but instead decides will make for a useful weapon. Efforts to recruit Raven to their team are met with polite rejection. A modest amount of experience is awarded, and the session ends here. Assault on Raven's Ruin was written by Tim Beach, who has made various other products for the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition line, such as Elminster's Ecologies Volume 2 or The Mastica Campaign. Canonically, Assault on Raven's Ruin is set in the Thunder Rift Canyon and fits with the Thunder Rift setting, but the Dungeon Master here has instead set the town of Kleina in Keramakos to fit his own scenario centered around the keep on the Borderlands. The module is meant as a basic level module for low-level characters, and largely works as such. It's a small dungeon with room for expansion if the DM so desires, but also works well as a one-shot or easy insert to an existing campaign. As is typical for basic modules, the setup is fairly railroady and sparse in details. It's pretty much meant to gloss over the setup with boxed text to get the players right into the action. This particular group played out the negotiations and setup in real time rather than simply having the DM read the scene and send them off to die. But this sandbox-style campaign requires player agency in the decision-making. There was the potential for the players turning down the job, which is all well and good in a sandbox game. The complex itself is fairly well laid out and stocked, and more or less the right level of difficulty for the assigned level range. This group was admittedly a little on the low side, being all first level, where the module suggests a range of levels from 2 to 3, though it's entirely in the ballpark of the capabilities of even a first level group, if they play smart. I do like the design of the complex, which adheres to an internal logic that's even spelled out right in the form of Raven's journal entries for each room. There are some gaps in the information presented that the DMs may wish to ponder. If the humanoids have only recently come into the complex as the module suggests, then how did the Galumph creature in the mudroom survive without food for years? The module also has stat blocks for large ravens to fit the theme, but large ravens don't factor into it unless you're using the optional wandering monster chart. There is one major glaring flaw of the complex, something clever players could exploit. That being, there's only one exit or entrance in a relatively tiny complex with inhabitants that must frequently come in and out. A smart group might realize this and lay an ambush for raiding parties that emerge. A single magic user with a sleep spell and some armed support will be able to completely neutralize small groups of raiders as they come through the door, thus whittling the numbers down to manageable levels before storming the compound. It's incumbent on the DM to keep careful track of the numbers in the complex should players opt for this tactic, rather than just reset as they enter, especially to reward smart groups for clever tactics. There are some aspects of the presentation that I dislike personally, things like the aforementioned railroad setup, as well as a suggestion at the end of the book to specifically pick out magic item rewards for players catered to their classes. Like many things in modules and games like these, this is down to personal taste, but I absolutely dislike catering rewards to characters. What they find should be what they get, and they must work with it. But even then, I must remind myself that this is a basic module which is tailored to players who are still learning, so more of a quibble than a criticism, and easily fixed by individual DMs. Maybe I'm just an old curmudgeon, but I believe that catering rewards to the players too often can lead to a level of entitlement or complacency, so it should be avoided if at all possible. I do, however, like the idea that if they wake Raven up, he's rather nonplussed at his home being looted, especially by the players, and demands his stuff be returned. This is otherwise great material for players, dealing with the moral quandary versus their desires. Talk about a tease. Of course, as you saw in this particular playthrough, the players' repeated incursions and reduction of inhabitants prompted a morale roll by the DM to see if the raiders would stick it out or depart. The failed roll indicated departure with the loot. This isn't laid out in the module and was purely the call of this DM in particular. Dungeon Masters might also want to think about how they'll deal with the carving of restful sleep, the cursed engraving that causes suspended animation when it's hung up. The players in this game immediately recognize its value as a potential weapon, and I'm sure they're not isolated in that thinking. If DMs don't mind their players having such an item, then it's a non-issue. But it might be necessary for DMs to give the magic item a limitation, or perhaps its magic is even spent when the players remove it to rescue Raven. I will note here that the item also does not allow a saving throw normally, though in this playthrough the Dungeon Master did allow players to save each round while they were in the room, and thus establishing the parameters for the context of this game. But such a potential weapon with no saving throw is powerful indeed. It's also worth pondering other ramifications of such an item. Clearly it suspends aging and puts the victim in stasis, but does it hold poisons? Halt disease? Something to think about. I feel the item should have been more fleshed out by the author. Sure, the DM can again fill in the blanks, but as a beginner module meant for learners, many players and DMs will ostensibly be of lower experience to do such things. So here is an area where more detail would have been of benefit. The module hints at lower dungeon levels that might further be explored should the DM wish to expand, but comes only with a map for the main level. The original publication came with a full-size, fold-out map, but this print-on-demand copy only reprints it as a small couple of pages. I would like to see poster maps properly reproduced in future print-on-demand releases, but that isn't a complaint about the module itself. So, do I recommend Assault on Raven's Ruin? Sure. It's not awful. There's some good times to be had. It's easily slipped into any existing game and yields both danger and reward for a low-level group. It doesn't quite sing to me like some of the other great iconic modules from the classic era, but it works well enough that players should enjoy the romp. I give it a solid B, if such ratings mean anything to you. Well, my friends, that concludes this foray into Raven's Ruin. We shall pick up with the group on their next adventure, and wherever their decisions take them. I shall see you anon, my friends.